Welcome. My name is Byron. If you don't know me, I'm one of the ministers here at Gungahlin Anglican Church, and you can normally find me right here or at the 10 a.m. service with the rest of my family. As Red said, today we are starting a short series on Jonah, and I get chapter 1, so I get to do the introduction. So what do we know about the book of Jonah? A quick rehash. Jonah is one of the minor prophets. It's in what the Hebrews call the book of the 12, so called because they could fit 12 of the books in one single scroll, unlike others like, say, Isaiah, who had 2 or 3 scrolls, because he just wrote that much. The situation it places, so it's about the actions of, or one set of actions of a guy called Jonah, the son of Amittai. Jonah, the son of Amittai, appears in the book 2 Kings in chapter 14, verse 25. He's mentioned there by name, and it tells you what kingdom he was serving in as a prophet. So that places the contents of this book somewhere between about 785 and about 750 before Christ. So a couple of years ago. By tying it to a historical account, so the book of Kings is the annals of the kings of Israel, it tells us that at least the fundamental tenets of this story are expected to be believed as if they happened, and there's no reason to say they didn't. It's a bit of a mix. There's 4 chapters, 3 chapters of prose, and 1 chapter of verse, chapter 2, which is where most people know Jonah from. It's the fish story. So yes, Jonah is the guy who gets swallowed by the fish, or whale, depending on whatever. It is a reasonably well-known story overall. Now, this book is not just about Jonah. Jonah is also a message to the people of Israel, as most of the Bible is. Most of the Bible is written not just about the Israeli people, but to them, and by extension through Christ to us as well. It becomes more obvious in the book of Jonah because Jonah is one of the words used for the ceremonial bird sacrifices, the birds that are pure for sacrifice, often translated in the Bible as pigeon or dove. Dove is significant because dove is one of the symbols of the people of Israel. So as you're reading this, every time you hear Jonah, you can hear Israel. Jonah, Jonah, Jonah. Now, there's a lot of what the moments in the first chapter of Jonah. So let's get straight into it. Now, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." The word of the Lord came to Jonah. That precedes pretty much every single prophecy in the Old Testament. This tells us that Jonah is a recognized prophet to the people of Israel. And he is hearing from God. And God says, go to these people because they are wicked and they need to hear about me. So here is a prophet, a chosen prophet of God. The book of Kings tells us that he has a ministry already. But what does he do? He doesn't go to Nineveh. He heads down to the coast and jumps a boat to Tarshish. Now, I think I actually have a picture of that. Now, that's way too hard to see. Just a little. And I don't have a laser pointer on me. Anyway, so pretty much on the middle of the picture is Israel. Joppa is on the southern coast of Israel. Nineveh is to the northeast. Still overland, is up the Tigris River. It's opposite modern-day Mosul. For those who know that location. So you can understand there's been a fair bit of conflict there over the years. Tarshish is the black dot over on the far left. You can't get any further west in the known world at the time. So that's how far Jonah decided to flee from God. And not just from God, the words used are from the presence or from the face of God. Now, those of us who have children, or if you've had children or know a lot of children, will probably recognise this. One of the ways you can tell if a child has done something that they know is outside expected behaviour is they can't make eye contact. Some will even go and hide. My youngest has a tendency of hiding under his bed on a bad day. This is what Jonah is doing. He knows his decision is horrible as far as God's purpose is concerned. So he's getting as far away from God as he thinks he can. He's put himself on a boat to the furthest destination he knows of. He's ducked down into the hold and he's trying to sleep it off. Jonah knows he's not doing the right thing. But why would he do that? Why would a prophet, why would somebody recognised as being a mouthpiece of God run away from God? Like, really? It doesn't make sense. You have a job, you're a recognised servant of the Lord Most High, and yet you run away. Now, for that, I'm going to have to give spoilers, I'm sorry, but chapter 4, verse 2, he's having a bit of a conversation with God because it hasn't gone well overall. By then, he's done his ministry, it's worked out the way God wanted, but he's not happy. So he's having words with God. And he goes, "Isn't this what I said when I was still at home? This is what I tried to forestall by fleeing to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity." So he ran off the opposite direction, to avoid telling people about God because he knows God is the kind of person who forgives. God is the kind of God who would rather people repent and come to him than to wipe them out. It makes me think, how often do we do that in our own lives? Probably not to such a great extent. I mean, I've never jumped in my car and driven off because of somebody I didn't like, I think. But, you think of a person comes to mind that you've had issues with in the past perhaps, and your initial reaction is, ooh, if I can avoid them. Or maybe there's a situation, or maybe it's a certain demographic that despite your best intentions, your subconscious reaction is, ooh, hesitation or aversion. Jonah is expressing this out loud. He knows what he's doing. But how often do we do it without speaking it out loud? So Jonah's in a boat. He's going left when he should have gone right. And a storm's building because God's got a job for Jonah to do and a point to prove. And the storm is building up. And the sailors, these are sailors that do this route all the time. The sailors are freaked out. They're going, this is bad. Throwing everything overboard. The ship's in risk of breaking up. And what is their reaction? Now think, at this time, most of the nations of the world are polytheistic. They believe in multiple gods. Usually there's some sort of supreme god overall, but they believe in gods for everything. Gods for fishing, gods for boat building, gods for carpentry, gods for, selling goods, stuff like that. And yet they approach Jonah and say, wake up, let's try your God. Let's see what's going with him. Now, they cast lots, which is kind of a weird thing. We don't do that. We don't roll dice to make decisions, generally. I do not have friends who have flipped coins before, but we don't tend to do it, especially in this environment in church. But that's what they do. They cast lots to find out who the problem child is on the boat. And it all falls on Jonah. And they wake him up and say, what is going on? I love Jonah's response. He's honest. He says, I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Now, why do I love this response so much? My favourite verse in the whole Bible is Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, it is understood that this was written down, like it was told orally, the history of Israel, but it was written down to encourage the people of Israel during their darkest years. During the years when they're imprisoned by a people that worship the planets, worship the sun and the stars. To remind them at the beginning of everything stood their God, stands our God. Now, as I said, most of these cultures at the time are polytheistic, but most of them recognise one supreme God over all who created everything. All the other gods work under that umbrella. Not too many worship that directly. But Jonah says, that's the God I worship. I don't worship these other things. There's only one God I worship, and that is the God who made everything. And that freaks the sailors out. I mean, it's one thing to cross, a minor deity of, maybe shipbuilding or something. But the God who made it all, even in the eyes of these people who didn't believe, who didn't worship as Jonah did, they knew that was a serious thing. What have you done? How do we fix this now? You've crossed the biggest God there is. You've crossed the only true God. How do we fix it? And Jonah goes, throw me into the ocean. Now, rightly, they go, you're not keen on that idea. Don't like the idea of throwing you over the side. Let's try a bit harder. But Jonah understands where he's at. He understands he has drifted so far outside of God's will, he can't just walk back on it. He can't just say, I'll just turn the boat around, it'll be okay. He's gone too far. He's halfway up the Mediterranean. The sea's rough. He knows God has sent that storm to wake him up, literally and figuratively. We like being in control. We like doing things our own way. When we need to make a lifestyle change or a life change, we like to do it a little bit at a time. I'll just change one thing, because changing everything at once is too hard. Now I'll change another thing. Once I'm fully comfortable that, yes, this is actually going to work, then I'll commit to it. That's our default setting. But Jonah realises he's gone too far. There is no creeping back from this. The only solution for him is to throw himself, or in this case, be thrown back on the mercy of God. And he can't do it on his own. I don't know if you've ever been on a really, really rough boat, but to try and get off it while it's rough is surprisingly hard. Now, it will throw you off, but to try and get off is really, really difficult. Jonah needs the help of these people to throw him over the side into where he needs to be. They don't understand it, but as a last resort, they're happy to help him. Too many times in our lives, we'll have these situations where we're in too deep. We can't get out on our own. So we need the people around us, even if they understand the journey or not, who are willing to grab us and help us on that path. But we need to be willing to ask them. Jonah, to his credit, finally said, you need to do this so that it will go well for you and for me. Now, I think he was willing to accept whatever the consequences were. How on else do you sleep in the hold of a boat in rough weather when you know you've disobeyed God? I think he'd finally come to the point of, whatever happens now, I have to accept it because there's nothing else I can do. Often in life, God will take us to those points where there is nothing left in us. There is no energy left. There is no strength left. So that we finally go, God, there is no other way, and we throw ourselves on his mercy. If only we did it earlier. But we are human after all. See, Jonah suffers from something that we all suffer from, and that is one of the greatest gifts, if not the greatest gift that God has given us, this side of the cross, and that is free will. Free will is such a beautiful thing because we can choose to love. We can choose to follow. We can choose to be with. Love that is forced, love that is compelled is not love. But love that is a choice is a beautiful thing. So Jonah got to choose. He could choose to, yes, just do what God told him to, or he could choose to run away because he didn't like what God was telling him to do. He made his choice. Fortunately, he understood the consequences of his actions. And that is what God is trying to get Israel to do through the story of Jonah. See, Israel has this habit, and we read it all through the Old Testament, of going, we're God's special people. God's love is just for us. It's just for us. Forgetting their entire backstory of all the outsiders and the foreigners and the sinners and the weird people They get called into God's family, forgetting that it has been so obvious in their own history that God's love is for everyone. So we have free will, we have a choice. We can choose to be in, or we can choose to be out. And if we're out, we can choose to come back. That is a beautiful thing. Jonah, in this passage, chose to come back. He chose the hard way. He enlisted the help of others to throw him back on the mercy of God. And those who are familiar with the rest of Jonah's story know what happened next. God was merciful. Merciful on Jonah and merciful on the people of Nineveh, because God, as Jonah's complaint was, is a God who likes to show mercy. And then what happens when Jonah throws himself back on the mercy of God, back into the centre of where God wants him? The last verse of the passage, at this the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. When we are past the end of ourselves and God takes over, that is undeniable even to those who do not believe in God. When it is past human ability, human comprehension, human energy and effort, and God does the work, then that has an impact. The choice we can make is to make the choice that Jonah did, but to make it early, to throw ourselves on God's mercy early, to allow him to do the work, because at the end of the day, we cannot do it ourselves. This book of Jonah is such a beautiful story. It tells us about the dangers and the powers of free will, about God's love and mercy to everyone, even the ones we do not like, even the ones we think are unworthy. God's love, God's desire for salvation is for all. And he challenges us to share that word with the world. Thank you.